You're listening to The Career Cue, and today we're talking with Heather Hamilton, who is founder of Whiz Bang Solutions, a consulting firm that offers brand marketing and employment to companies and nonprofits. Heather has a background in marketing consulting and has 15 years' experience in the staffing industry. She was one of the early pioneers of recruitment blogging. It was this early experience with social media that sparked her interest and put her on a path that would eventually lead her to helping companies and organizations do better at having authentic and beneficial conversations with the people who make them successful. This is The Career Cue, the podcast focused on helping you navigate the signals in your career to keep you growing and moving forward in business and in life. Here's today's host, Dana Redmond.
Heather, thanks for coming in today. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, thanks, Dana. Good to see you.
Well, let's go ahead and let's jump right in. We are going to be talking about personal brand today. And I've heard so much about personal brand. You tell me, how do you define personal brand?
Sure. So just to give you kind of a little bit of history, I first started thinking about personal brand when social media was relatively new. I was working as a recruiter. And as a recruiter, I was discovering ways of finding talent online via social media. And so when I was doing that, I was actually able to kind of see the good, bad, and ugly of personal branding. I saw people who did a fantastic job of representing themselves online and people who made some horrible mistakes that they didn't realize were impacting their ability to find an open position. So at that time, there was also an influx of new tools that people could use to manage their personal brand. So things like LinkedIn. So I, at that time, was really thinking about how can I coach other people on developing their personal brand? How do I coach the candidates that I'm talking to? And then how do I use what I see online to evaluate talent? You know, you asked if personal brand impacts more than just the job search, and it definitely does. Obviously there's an online piece, there's an in-person piece, but the impact is really a lot broader. So it can be things like your promotability at work. It can impact your relationship with your neighbors. It can impact your social life. If you think about it, an online dating profile is really an expression of your personal brand. So, but in a real basic sense, when you think about what your personal brand is, it's the promise that you make to people on what the experience is like interacting with you. If you're a company like Amazon, for example, that promise is around customer service and it's around massive selection and great prices. Or if you're a company like Apple, it's about beautiful design and really being able to seamlessly integrate your devices into your lifestyle. For people, it's about what people can expect when they work with you, or as I said, if they're your neighbor, if they interact with you in any way. So there's kind of that element, which is that expectation, that kind of promise that you make about what that experience is going to be like. And then there's branding, which is a set of things that someone can do or a company can do to kind of take control of that message. So I think it was Jeff Bezos who said, your brand is how people talk about you when you're not in the room. That's a little hard to kind of handle for a lot of people because they want to have a little bit more control over what's being said about them. So there's a set of activities that you can leverage that will help you kind of take control and manage your personal brand.
I love that. I love that there's a distinction, if you will, around your personal brand and branding then, which feels much more like the steps you take, like the active work you do, and then that personal brand is the promise, right? I love that. I love that concept of just boiling it down to your personal brand is that promise that people expect from you and what they get. So, how do I go about understanding what my personal brand is? Like if I'm, do I just look myself up do a quick internet search and see what comes up? Because at the moment, it's maybe my Facebook page, which is full of, cat videos and a few other things.
So it's funny because if you do some research on personal brand online, I think some of those kind of tactical things are some of the things that you're going to find. But there's some really more foundational steps, and I think they kind of highlight why people struggle managing their personal brand. I think it's really easy to tell people to go and beef up their LinkedIn profile. The problem that people have is they don't know what to say. They don't know how to think about their personal brand or how to define it. So there's a couple of steps that I encourage people to go through to really understand what their brand is and kind of figure out how to map that brand and manage the activities that they're going to leverage in order to control that. So So the first is really understanding how you're perceived by people who know you. So this is kind of like a company doing customer experience research. And I actually had someone do this kind of research for me personally. I hired a consultant a few years back. I was thinking about how I was going to market myself, and I hired this consultant to talk to some of my former coworkers and some of my clients and ask them questions about what the experience of working with me was like. And that exercise was so incredibly beneficial to me because I had an idea of what I thought I had to offer. And when I heard, or in this case read, how my clients talked about it, it sounded completely different. And so what that did is it helped me start to understand about communicating my personal brand around the impact that it has on other people.
Oh, interesting.
So kind of understanding it from their perspective.
Right. One question on that, like how different was that perception, like from your self-perception to what you heard, you know, back from you? Was it very different or just?
Well, it was kind of framed differently. So, as many new business owners do, I really started thinking about what are the things I want to offer. And so it was what I was initially thinking about was really very transactional kinds of things. And what I got from these interviews was more about how it made them feel. So I'll give you one example. I had a client who I was helping do two projects. They had two projects going on, both related to social media. So one was understanding the online reputation of a division of a technology company. And the other project was to use social media to encourage customer readiness. So they had these two projects. They had no one with a social media background to come in and do these projects. And so I came in and I managed both of those projects for them. So when the client was asked what, in a couple words, just encapsulate what I delivered to them, he said stress relief. And so that made me think differently about what I was offering. Because really, what I realized was that he didn't understand the space, right? Which is great for a consultant. You want clients who don't understand the space. Yeah. And because he didn't understand it, he was worried about being able to deliver on these two projects. And so for me, I know now then that I need to market my ability to manage projects from A to Z, to help communicate to internal stakeholders the stage we are in the project and how to communicate the success of the work. So it just kind of highlighted those few things that I was able to communicate about my own skills that I thought was going to really resonate with people in a way that connected with their own needs and their own experience at that time.
Yeah, that's incredible, right? Because it really is less about the tactical. You put together the project plan to, do a social media campaign for them, let's say, and more about, hey, how did that actually impact the unit or impact specifically the, the manager that had hired you?
Yeah, and it actually really drove me to think differently about what I actually offered. So one of the things based on some of this feedback that I decided to offer to some of my clients was a social media playbook, because a lot of them want to do social media, leverage social media on their own. I think that's great. I think most companies should have someone in-house leveraging their social media so it feels true and authentic. But they don't know how to pick their channels. They don't know how to develop their voice. And so knowing that I, could teach them, because they were having this stress about not understanding the space, but they still wanted to do it themselves, one of the things I could offer was developing a playbook for them. So it allowed me to kind of pull a few more of the things that I could offer in and just kind of expand my business.
Great. And so then as you had somebody come in and, do this research for you, do you think you need a third party to go out there? Can people sort of query their own network?
Yeah. So I think you can do it on your own. I don't think everyone, managing their personal brand, I was starting a new business. So it made sense for me. And frankly, I had this consultant doing some other things for me as well. I don't think that you're going to want to necessarily pay someone. If you can, I think that's fantastic. I definitely feel like you can ask people. You might not get the same depth of answer or the same level of honesty from that. But I think you can also do things like look at your past performance reviews. I think all of us have some compliment that we've received in mind that made us really feel good about our work. So I think you can leverage some of those things as well. So I think you can kind of find opportunities. I think the key is to just be looking for them.
Right. One of the interesting places for me that I think that when I've sort of heard my personal brand reflected back to me is when other people introduce me. And I distinctly remember, being in meetings and having somebody going around or they're introducing you to somebody new and just hear the words they use to describe who you are and what you do can be very eye-opening to think like, oh, wow, they think that I am, that thing. I'm like, wow, I'd have never described myself in that way. Usually it's a positive way that somebody is describing you, but it's just a different tilt on it. And then it makes you sort of think differently about that.
Yeah, it does. I think a big eye-opener for me earlier in my career when I was at Microsoft was I started blogging, as you mentioned, and I would go out and do speaking engagements and be introduced, or I'd get, I'd see other people talking about me online. And describing me in ways that I probably wouldn't be brave enough to describe myself. So, yeah, it is. It's really, I think we all have kind of this inner doubter and kind of this critical voice in our heads. And so we're so used to getting feedback and thinking like, ooh, here it comes, These are the things I'm going to have to fix. But I think you need to look for the opportunities to find those things that you're really good at. And I think for anyone, I think you're going to see themes. And you start to think about like, how do these things relate to each other?
Right. Maybe that's not the direction, or maybe that's not the way you'd want to hear yourself described, right? How do you go about maybe changing your brand?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the first thing that people should think about is what their personal goals are. So your brand should be dependent on what you're trying to achieve, and not just your goals at work, but things that your vision of what you want your life to be like. Then I think you start to evaluate who are the people, in order for those goals to become reality, who are the people that need to have a particular perception of you? How do you need to influence them, and what does that perception need to be? So I'll give you an example, back to the blog from Microsoft. So when I had started this blog in 2004, I actually did a little bit of a marketing exercise, and I started to think about the fact that my personal brand was very tightly intertwined with this blog. And so to gather a following on the blog, I was really going to need to promote my personal brand, and I needed to kind of decide what that personal brand was. So I kind of sat back and I said, who are the people that are important to the success of this blog? I want this blog to be successful. Right. And I was able to kind of highlight a couple different categories. I wanted job seekers to read the blog. I wanted people who weren't looking for a job but might be looking for a job someday. I wanted other people in the recruiting industry who could refer people to the blog or might link to my blog. I wanted the media to see the blog. I wanted it to start to change the perceptions of how people were thinking about working at Microsoft. So I started to think about who all of these people were and what I wanted their perception of me to be. And so I, kind of came up with some thoughts on how I wanted to model myself. And when I say that, I'm not trying to represent myself as something other than I am. I think your personal brand needs to 100% be who you are. But I think you highlight aspects of your personality that you want to have come through that are engaging to your target audience who are going to help you reach your goals. So for me at that time, I started to think about promoting myself as the kind of person that other people would want to work with, and what makes you someone that other people want to work with. And so my two key things that I tried to focus on, two key themes on the blog, were clever and funny, or insightful and funny. And so I knew to keep going back because the insightful was going to get me the media attention for press interviews. And the funny was gonna get me those return readers that might not necessarily be looking for a job, but they're kind of interested. And so I was able to kind of pick out those couple things. And I think anyone can do that when they're kind of thinking through what their goals are and who the people are that they want to influence.
I love that, where you specifically focused on who is your target audience, right? And who did you need to know about you, and what did you want them to perceive? And that it was just a couple of super crisp words, right? Insightful and clever. And that was important because you were, trying to get in the public space, and you needed people to retweet about you and reblog about you and draw some attention. So I love that. I mean, for me, one of my funniest personal brand stories is actually a personal one. I've got a 10-year-old son, and I am primarily in charge of helping him with his homework. Like out of my husband or I help him with his homework the most. It's just sort of the way the chips have fallen in our life, right?
Yep.
So I have a background in human resources and social media and, the whole business route, right? Marketing, all of that. My husband is a hardcore engineer. He's a software engineer. I would go into his office at times and there'd be equations written on the whiteboard. I was like, when I was in math class, I was like, why would anybody ever use those? And we would joke that he's a hardcore math guy. About 2 years ago, my son brings home, he would have been in 3rd grade then, brings home his homework. And we're going through it. And I said, I've got some plans tonight, so Daddy's going to help you. And he's like, oh, Mommy, but can you just help me with my math first? And I said, sure, but Daddy can help you. And he said, no, Mommy, you do math. Daddy does art. Which, and I looked at my husband and he's like, I was like, that might be my marketing background that just convinced my son that I am his math expert, right?
Maybe.
But it was an interesting, both of us are like, oh, there's not a lot of people that would have given, that as my personal brand or that art was Brian's personal brand. So, just even in a really personal aspect of it, right, we sort of portray these traits to people and they pick up on different things. So.
Yeah. And I think, your brand kind of lives out there and you have to deal with what it is. I think we have kind of our aspirational brand, which is how we want people to see us. So that is the clever and the funny. But we also have to deal with the reality of what people are already saying. And that's where Googling yourself kind of comes into play. It's not a huge part of branding, but I think, there will be times where people will look you up by name. I think especially in your situation where you're doing a podcast, people might want to learn more about you and go look at your LinkedIn profile. So it's a good idea to just see kind of what's out there and who's talking about you and what they're saying. And some of it, you'll learn new positive things about yourself. And then you'll also be able to highlight areas where maybe you haven't expressed yourself as well. So kind of holes in your personal brand where you need to add more and maybe put some more content out there about specific skills. And then also maybe just some things that are some misconceptions about your work. Hopefully we wouldn't find many of those.
So when I think about it, right, how do I go about that? Where do I... Maybe it's a bit on that branding. Where do I put my brand out there? Where do you think it all shows up?
Yeah, so I think it depends. When I kind of talked about figuring out who the people are that you need to influence, I think you need to start to think about how they're going to engage with you. So first of all, let's say you're a job seeker. So you need to show up online. You need to show up on LinkedIn. You probably, if you're technical, you might want to be on GitHub. That's some place that a hiring manager or a recruiter would possibly find you. You might want to show up in places where other people from the companies you want to work at show up. Mm-hmm. So maybe you want to, work at a company and there's meetups about the technology space that they work in. And so you want to kind of put yourself there. So I think about two things. So one is, showing up for the people who are looking for something. And then making sure that you are there and you are using the words to describe yourself that they use to find you. Right? Because you want to do a little bit of keyword optimization. You don't want to make it icky. You don't want to dump a bunch of keywords in a profile. But, if they are using search, you want to make sure that you're going to show up in those places. The other one is just kind of a broader presence. So, and that might pertain more to your long-term goals. So, for example, for me, doing this podcast with you, it's really just kind of, increasing my visibility, getting to share my message with some people. It's not necessarily achieving a particular goal that I'm trying to check off my checklist, but the kinds of people that listen to your podcast are kinds of people who might be interested in what I do, and they might remember me. So I think, there's these really specific goals and you want to be findable, but then there's also kind of just engaging in the broader community of people around you.
Yeah, it is interesting to think about the sort of all the many places your brand can be out there, whether you know it or not, right? It's, what articles do you forward on? Or, there's lots of things of, which articles are you liking on LinkedIn or on Facebook and some of these places, right? And sort of what is that persona and how similar do they need to be? So sort of what's your take on that? I feel like if I'm going after a job or job seekers are out there, there's sort of there's a professional brand, that
Right.
they're trying to portray. But then on the flip side, they might love kitty cats, right? I don't know,
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so how should somebody think about blending those,
Yeah.
or are they separate? Or
They're not separate. They're definitely intertwined. I think it's important to know, when you're expressing yourself online, what's relevant in a particular medium. So one of the things that drives me absolutely nuts is when people comment on dumb stuff in LinkedIn, quizzes or political stuff or whatever, because that impacts their brand. It shows up. People see that you've commented on that. All of your connections can see that. So it's kind of making sure that what you're expressing is relevant. I mean, for sure, your professional experience and your professional brand is going to show up on LinkedIn. But, I include hobbies on my LinkedIn profile and volunteer stuff that I do because, specifically if you're looking for a position, which many people on LinkedIn are, it really says who you are as a person, and they're hiring the whole person. They're not just hiring a resume, right? So you do want to kind of give a good idea of who you are. On the flip side of that, recruiters use Facebook, as we know, to find people. People are connected. I mean, people are using Twitter, and your personal brand and your professional brand are going to live in the same place. So I think you need to be mindful. One thing I would tell people to be mindful of is the fact that, Twitter's public and anyone can find it. And, there's privacy settings on things like Facebook. So just understand whether the things that you're putting out into the world are searchable and have a negative impact or cause confusion around your personal brand. But they for sure are intertwined. And we're all used to that now, right? Like I think, 10, 15 years ago, that was more of a cause of stress for people. And it was like, you only represent yourself this way on this platform. And I think we have all come to, acknowledge the fact that people have lives. We might know them professionally, but they have other things going on. And that's good.
Right. That we're all humans,
We're all
right?
human.
Yes,
We're all human. So I think, a lot of my work that I've gotten as a consultant has come from people that I know personally. So you don't want to compartmentalize too much, You are who you are. You might want to articulate it in different ways to different audiences on different channels. But still, I would say don't be afraid of kind of showing your whole self.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, because your whole self is who will show up at a job. Your whole self is who needs to get promoted, or your whole self is who, needs to get through that career.
Yeah. Yeah. And, if you do show up for a new job and you find that people are surprised at who you are, that might not be a good thing.
Right. Fair. Okay. So I do have to ask. So do you have any great stories about sort of personal branding gone wrong that you've seen?
Oh my goodness. So I would say what I see more often than not is people who haven't invested in their personal brand. Mm-hmm. So, I think there's examples of people posting inappropriate content on different places. As I mentioned, LinkedIn is a place where that shows up pretty frequently. I'm a very active unconnector or
unlinking.
Because I don't want to see that kind of stuff. But what I do notice more often is people who it's very clear they have not invested in their online profile. People who very clearly want to reach the next stage of their career or want to do a certain type of work or want to be seen in a certain way, but it's the way you experience them is incomplete or very sterile, or you don't find them at all. And so I think that's the biggest mistake that I see people making.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Right. You can put a brand out there, but then the way people experience you, if it is different than, sort of what the words you're saying, pretty quickly the words you say is not as important as sort of the way you act.
We can all come up with like an aspirational brand of how we want people to see us, but you really need to tie it to what your actual strengths are that other people can acknowledge. There are some things, like I might think I'm a great singer.
And do you think you're a great singer?
Not right now. But I mean, I could tell people I'm a great singer, and if they hear me sing, they will realize that I am not a great singer, although I do have a very large repertoire of 70s hits that I can serenade you with.
Okay, all right. We'll get to those.
But yeah. So I think that really focusing on basing your personal brand in truth and kind of that intersection of what you're really good at and what people want to experience from you.
Heather, this is great, but let's take a quick break. And then when we come back, I want to just jump into sort of the top tips for managing your brand.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out the show notes at thecareerq.com, where you can also subscribe to the podcast and sign up for our newsletter.
Welcome back. We're talking with Heather Hamilton about personal brand. So, Heather, before the break, we had a great conversation about, kind of what is personal brand and how can you go about getting there. So can you just boil it down for us and give us some of your top tips for managing personal brand?
Sure. So we've talked a lot about managing a brand online, and I think that's what everyone goes to, right? They want to go to the tactics and where they can impact their personal brand right now. One of the key things that I think people need to get really good at if they're going to be an effective communicator of their personal brand is how to develop and literally deliver their pitch.
Right.
So you need to be able to articulate not only what you do, but communicate that in a way that matters to people. So for example, if you're a software developer and you are looking for your next career opportunity, and some of the feedback or some of your brand themes that you want to incorporate into your personal brand are, code quality and keeping timelines. Imagine you're at a barbecue and someone asks you, what do you do? So I literally practice this question out loud at home. Someone asks you what you do. So in that situation, the person might say, I'm a software developer at Acme Corporation, and I'm working on a new product with a really aggressive timeline. So I spend about half my time writing code and the other half working with our product manager and coaching team members on code quality. So that's really different than saying I'm a software developer or I'm a software developer at Acme Corporation. That feels different. And what that's going to do is going to help that other person potentially connect you with people who have a need for what you do and who you are.
Right. That is so interesting. It's just an elaboration or a different twist on that, right? It's all 100% true, but it's just how you describe it. And especially then, because it helps, I think, with that person, their perception of if you said, I'm a software developer, then you sit in your office and you type all day, right? Like that's what you do. When really, no, right? It is. I'm managing timelines. I'm, managing the quality of the code.
Yeah. And that person that you're talking to might trigger something for them. Like, we really care about code quality where I work. It's nice to talk to someone who actually makes that a priority. Maybe I should connect them to, this person who's hiring on our team. So I think it's just a really good tool for people to use. I have to catch myself sometimes when people ask me what I do because every once in a while I do just tell people I'm a marketing consultant. It actually depends on how much I want to talk to the person.
Well, they go, oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah. But I've worked diligently on kind of figuring out what that right pitch for me is, and it's really about helping companies connect and have authentic conversations with the people they communicate with online. You noticed that as part of the bio that you introduced me with. So I think everyone should have that. It's not just for people who are speaking or who are up on stage or communicating really broadly. I think you should be able to kind of do that 30-second elevator pitch on who you are and feel comfortable doing it. And that's why you have to practice out loud.
Right. Yes, that practice is key. Yeah. All right. So what other tips do you have for us?
Okay. So I think monitoring your personal brand is important. So there's, we kind of talked a little bit about building your personal brand, kind of understanding it, understanding the perception, understanding your audiences and what you want them to feel about you and where you can find them. But your brand is going to shift, right? Because as I mentioned, you're not really in control of it. It's happening out there. And so you kind of want to stay on top of it. So there's a couple things that I recommend that people do. So first off, I would say maybe schedule a personal brand check-in for yourself every 4 to 6 months. I know people are busy. I recommend you put this on your calendar. The holidays are actually a great time to do this when things kind of quiet down professionally and you have some relatives you want to escape from. Having that calendar reminder go off might be really convenient. And then do things like think about the new people that you met this year who have worked with you that might be able to give you more insight into what your brand is. Mm-hmm. Think about the feedback that you got this year. I used to look through my emails and look for any kind of praise I got or any kind of questions or corrections that I might have gotten. Look at your goals, revisit your goals. So if your goals have shifted, then you kind of need to go through this process. And, it's an iterative process. You need to go through it again. So, suddenly if you identify the new goal of speaking at conferences, that's going to bring up a whole new set of people that you need to communicate with. And it might bring up a different way of articulating or even a new set of brand themes that you need to focus on for yourself. So revise those goals, rethink about who your audience is. Again, look at where they are online, where they might search for someone like you, to speak at a conference, or maybe internally you want to be approved to go speak or have other people recommend those speaking opportunities to you. You need to find ways of making that known online. Maybe you put together some slide decks and make them visible externally on SlideShare and internally on SharePoints, and start to talk about your interest and show examples of how well you communicate in that type of a medium. Then again, look at those mediums and go through, and for each medium, look at incremental opportunities to improve your personal brand. So I think LinkedIn is a really easy place to do this. What can I add here? On LinkedIn, go look at who's looking at your profile. You can do that. Ask yourself questions about, why is this person looking at my profile? What might they be looking for? And how can I communicate a little bit more of that in my LinkedIn profile? So things like that. Just think about all the different places that you show up and how you can just tweak your brand a little bit and just add new content that really keeps it fresh. Another thing I think that people should explicitly do, and I hear varying opinions on this, is asking for LinkedIn recommendations. So I've heard people say that any, bozo could get a LinkedIn recommendation. That's not necessarily true, but most bozos can get a LinkedIn recommendation. What they can't get is a really good, authentic LinkedIn recommendation that expresses their own personal brand themes.
Right.
So I've had situations where I've been given some positive feedback from a coworker or a client, and the next thing out of my mouth is, hey, I love that feedback. Would you mind if I sent you a LinkedIn recommendation request? Do that. Because if those recommendations are good and there are themes in there, it's so much better coming from the mouth of someone who has experienced you in real life than it is if you're saying it about yourself.
Yeah, and I will say that for me, sort of that reflection back, a corporate job after many years, and I was managing a team, an organization of people. And sort of as I left, I said, hey, let's do this. I'm going to send you requests. I will write this feedback for you, right? So, that it was all still fresh in everybody's minds. And then going back and reading those, I was like, wow.
Those are great.
I was like, I had, these people had never quite, they had never expressed it verbally or in writing before, but sort of the impact I'd had on them was, this big buoy for me of wow, that was really cool that that's the way other people think of me. And at that point, I probably wouldn't have described myself as, that type of a leader. But when I heard 3 or 4 people reflect that back, it was, super compelling for me. I was like, whoa, okay, maybe I need to think about how I talk about myself a little bit differently and incorporate in some of those words and sort of elevate myself a bit in my own thinking.
Yeah, and I also feel like sometimes when you're asking for those recommendations, you can do a little prompting around how you want to be described. So,
right.
And not too much prompting, but I think it's good to remind people of the things that they've said about you or what the experience is like, or let them know hey, your opinion is really valuable to me. I'm looking at getting speaking engagements. Would you mind addressing my communication skills? Or I'm looking for building more consulting business. Would you talk a little bit about what it was like with me managing this project and the kind of interaction that we had? So I think you can kind of prompt the right areas and not just kind of throw caution to the wind and say, hey, write whatever you want. I think that's totally okay. And in fact, I think when people are giving you a recommendation, they like that because it gives them a little structure to work with.
Right. Any other top tips you want to be sure that we take away?
I've got a few more.
All right, let's hear them.
So I would say be clear about the opportunities that you're looking for. It's kind of the make sure you go out and ask for it type of thing. I think maybe some people might not want to say that they're looking for a job on LinkedIn, but if you're networking with people, don't be afraid to say, hey, I'm really here because I'm interested in expanding this part of my career or getting more experience in this space. I would also encourage people, you would think this would go without saying, but I just see this all the time. Help people contact you. Let them know how to get in touch with you. Don't make recruiters send you an email on LinkedIn. Somehow incorporate your email address. It'll be okay. The spammers might get it, but it'll be okay. Make it easy for people to engage you. Be conversational so that they feel comfortable doing that. I've had situations where people have experienced me online and then reached out to me and talked to me in person, and they're like, whoa, this is really weird. You sound in person exactly like you do online. So you want to just kind of set that tone and make it really easy for them and comfortable for them to get in touch with you. Another big tip, and this has actually been really big for me since I've started my consulting career, is to help other people. So I have known a number of people who are interested in just getting started as a consultant in the last few years, and I spend time meeting with them. So first of all, it just feels good to be able to help other people.
Right.
And so I want to do that. But I get so much from those meetings. First of all, I get some of that feedback that I'm looking for because they're thankful and they're able to tell me exactly how I was able to help them. And some of those themes relate to what I do, more broadly. Also, those people will talk about you in a really positive way. And you obviously want that to happen. So, it might not be necessarily a situation where they're going to, turn around and somehow offer you business. But I've had clients talk to someone they know, and that person recommends me to someone else. So I think you just put the good stuff out there, put some good out there, and it most certainly comes back to you.
Yeah.
I mean, it literally comes
Right.
back to you.
Yes,
It's not
it
an
does.
energy thing. It will come back.
Yes.
So just spend some time doing that. Another thing that I learned, so you might not be able to tell this. You might not know this about me, Dana. I'm a classic introvert. Did you know that?
No, I did not
Okay,
know
that might be. I think it's
Yes.
a surprise to a lot of
Yeah.
people. I spend a lot of time alone. I think when you're expressing your personal brand, you have to do it in a way that's comfortable for you. So, for example, going to meetups is not going to be part of my personal brand expression because the idea of walking into a room full of people that I don't know is super uncomfortable for me. Walking into a client meeting is no problem. So I think it's okay. I think you'll see people online saying, if you want to promote yourself as this, you need to go here and here. If it doesn't work for you, if you're going to avoid it because it's uncomfortable,
Right. Yeah.
don't do it.
And it's just not going to come across as authentic.
It's
You are going
not.
to be at that meeting a robot or, hiding behind your coffee cup
Exactly.
or whatever.
And I made those mistakes, right? So I have gone to some of those events and I'm like, I cannot wait to get out of here.
Right.
I put on makeup for this. Come on. So, yeah, I think you just need to be honest with who you are.
Right.
And decide how to make your personal brand expression be comfortable and enjoyable for you. Another piece that I hear people ask about quite a bit is social media. And how much time should I be spending on social media?
Yes,
And how do I
yes.
know if I should be there? Which channels should I pick? I talk to clients about this a lot because, as I mentioned before, sometimes they'll ask me to develop a marketing playbook for them. And a big piece of that is social media. And they want the whole shebang. They're like, should I be on Facebook and Twitter? And should we do a business page on LinkedIn? And, I encourage people to make it manageable. Don't do everything. You're going to overwhelm yourself. Try something. And if it works for you, that's great. But don't do too much. Because what I think most people don't realize is the key to being really successful on social media is not only creating your own content, but engaging with other people's content. That's the community or networking part, right? So it's kind of this hidden time commitment that you're going to need to make. And so if you're going to do something like Twitter really well, you're not just going to be posting tweets a couple times a day. You're going to be reading other people's tweets. You're going to be researching hashtags. You're going to be answering and retweeting and doing all of those types of things. So I would say, if there's no harm in kind of keeping it really simple and kind of controlled. Those are some of the things that people ask about and how I tell them to think about those things.
I love that. Thank you so much, Heather. This has been a great conversation. But as we get sort of toward the end of our time here, I want to go to some of the standard questions we like to ask all of our guests on the Career Queue here.
Yep.
So tell me, what was your first job?
So knowing that you were going to ask me about my first job, I really scratched my memory bank to remember what my first job is. I had so many jobs in high school. I worked at a video store. I worked at a T-shirt shop. I worked at a gas station. So it's really hard for me to say exactly what my first job was. So let me talk about my first professional job was where I felt like I was using my education, was doing accounting and kind of helping with property management at a real estate investment firm. I know it sounds incredibly exciting.
Wow.
And absolutely not related to what I'm doing now.
I was going to say that's interesting. So what from that? Do you still use anything from that? Or how do you think did that give you a foundation? Or when you look back at that, what do you think?
It taught me some things not to do. So one of my big memories and kind of key takeaways from that whole experience, so I had graduated during a recession, which is why I kind of ended up in a career space that wasn't going to be my long-term situation. And when I interviewed for this position, the leader of the firm asked me what This sounds so asinine now. This happened, and I totally blew it. He asked me what's the least amount of money I needed to make to get by. And I answered the question. And yeah, I mean, even as it was coming out of my mouth, I'm like, I really probably shouldn't be doing this. But, it was a recession and I wanted to work. That is how much money I made the entire time I was working there. So the one learning from that, and I coach job seekers on this all the time, is your compensation information is your information. You do not benefit yourself by sharing that. If you get really pressed, you can share what you're looking for. You can maybe share a range, but you do yourself no good. And even if you do share a range, just keep in mind that other person heard the low end of your range. So you just need to be prepared for that. I was not prepared at 23 years old. So,
the least amount. You're like, well, I could eat top ramen and I could not
I did.
go out.
I did. That was pretty much it. Yeah. So, and it also told me who I was working with.
Right.
So lesson learned.
Yeah. All right. So what have you read or listened to lately that you would recommend to others?
So there's actually one piece of content that I share with people that I know socially, and that it's almost like required reading for clients to work with me. And it's a TED Talk by Simon Sinek called "How Great Leaders Inspire Action." And it sounds like it's going to be about leadership, and it is, but it's also about how to communicate what you do. Because leaders do a good job of communicating what they do so people will follow them. So as someone specifically who's working on their personal brand, you could think about how you communicate what you do in the way that Simon recommends, which is to not only talk about what you do, but talk about why you do it, because that's what's super compelling. People buy for the why. I just made that up, by the way. That's
I
awesome.
like that. All right, let's trademark that quickly. Yeah. Trademark. Buy for the why.
So yeah, you just need to articulate why you do what you do. And what I actually ask clients to do is a little exercise where they talk about their work, but they start the sentence with the words "I believe" or "we believe." And that helps them kind of crystallize what their why is. And it also helps them do a good job of differentiating themselves. Like all of my clients that I've ever worked with are competing with other companies in their space. And so when you start with the "we believe" or the "I believe," and I notice that specifically my current client is Amazon, and they're really good. They've got these leadership principles where they have a core set of beliefs that are completely interwoven with their culture. That's super compelling to people because people can look at that and say, I believe that too. That's how I feel. That makes me want to work there. So I think if you can get that down for yourself, it really helps you kind of build bonds of common interest and understanding with people.
Yeah, I love that. Yes, I'll definitely have to look that up, and we can link to that in
Sounds
our
good.
show notes too, so everybody that's listening can find that TED Talk too.
Yep.
So one of my favorite questions is, if your 90-year-old self came walking in here, what would that person say to you?
Well, first of all, I would ask that 90-year-old self why she couldn't have given me some advice when I was in my 20s.
Come back earlier.
Yeah. But, what I hope at this point, I'm middle-aged. I'm okay admitting that. You've known me for a number of years,
Yes,
so
yeah.
I think this is no surprise to you, is that, I'm kind of beyond the point where I think my 90-year-old self is going to teach me any profound lessons about, like, don't stress about the small stuff or focus on this in your career. So what I hope my 90-year-old self would say to me was, that was fun.
I love that. I love that, right? And I think for me, that goes back to sort of your personal brand about that insightful and clever, right? I mean, when I think about you, yes, I think your 90-year-old self could come back and say, thanks, that was fun.
Thanks, Dana. That's nice.
I love that.
And this was fun too, by the way.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming in today, Heather. It has been so much fun talking about personal brand with you. And so I'll just tell all of our listeners to go ahead and check us out on thecareerq.com. Check us out on iTunes and be sure to rate and review it. Heather, thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Dana.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to head on over to thecareerq.com where you can get more information, show notes, and related articles to today's topic. Also, if you like what you're hearing, head on over to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a rating and review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again.
The Career Q podcast is produced by Lens Group Media and recorded at Jack Straw Cultural Center in the gray and rainy Seattle, Washington.